Well, we're very happy to have John Borrowman back with us today here at BBR. He has been in the recruiting business in the business valuation and litigation support profession for over 20 years. His firm, Borrowman Baker, is based in Nashville, Tennessee, and is the only firm devoted exclusively to the recruitment of individuals in the valuation profession. He has been a presenter at national valuation conferences for the American Society of Appraisers, the AICPA, and the National Association of Certified Valuation Analysts. I'd also like to mention that John is a longtime volunteer reader and describer with the Houston Taping for the Blind, and his work allows the blind to enjoy live performances of stage plays, musicals, and even the Houston Rodeo. You can hear his voice on books checked out through the Library of Congress Talking Book Program. A very worthwhile endeavor. And with that, I'll now turn the program over to our presenter for today, John Borrowman. John?
Thank you, Andy. And hello, all of you out there. Hello to all of you out there. Thank you very much for joining us today. There are probably some of you that I have met, maybe known a few years, but there's probably a lot of you that I've never had the pleasure of meeting. And welcome to you. I want to let you know to start that this presentation is not about how to do it, how to do the hiring. It's not about step 1, step 2, step 3, or insert tab A into slot B. I'm just going to talk about how to do it better. My intention is that you come away with some practical ideas for how you can do it better. And I've allowed time at the end for questions, but if something that I say triggers a question, please let us know. Type it in. I'll address it. The chances are others have the same question, okay? Now, it's probably no secret to anyone listening that it's tough to hire quality talent. But why is that? Now, I think it's fundamentally because valuation is a unique industry with unique hiring challenges. The first thing to recognize is that valuation is a business of judgment. Now, what is my evidence for that? Well, what do you call your deliverable? You call it an opinion or maybe a conclusion of value. In other words, it comes from your judgment, and it's that judgment that your clients pay you for. Okay, how does that affect hiring? Well, let me show you what I see from where I sit, and you can test it against your own perspective. Let's assume this is the organizational pyramid of a BVFLS practice, okay? Now, draw a horizontal line, about 1/4 to maybe 1/3 of the way up from the bottom. And for those of you keeping score at home, this correlates to roughly, 18 to 24 months of experience. Now, when you are hiring an employee who's going to function below that line, you can hire from any number of places. You have options. You could hire an equity analyst, maybe a credit analyst from a bank, maybe someone even in an FP&A role in industry. You could even bring someone over from the audit or tax department in your firm. And of course, you can hire entry-level people. But when you need to hire an employee who functions above that line, that is, someone who must exercise judgment, your only option is to hire someone within the profession. Now, when you factor in the growth of valuation and litigation support, together with the fact that people do leave the profession, and yes, they do leave the profession, you can see how demand will nearly always outpace supply. Now, if you need to hire in the 2 to 4 year experience range, there is also the normal supply-demand imbalance that occurs at that level. And if it's any consolation to you, this is not unique to valuation or even to consulting services more broadly. Across the country, the highest demand is for talent in that 2 to 4 year experience range. These professionals are experienced enough to be productive while still being profitable. Everybody wants them. Naturally, that creates a demand that exceeds supply. But there is another factor which constrains supply and which I think most employers don't necessarily recognize. Now, here's how I want to explain that. Remember a time, if you can, when you were learning something new. Maybe it was a mechanical skill, maybe it was a mental skill, and you started to feel like you were getting the hang of it. Do you remember those aha moments? Those times when you found yourself thinking, this is how it's done. Now I understand. That is exactly what that 2 to 4 year evaluation professional is thinking. The fog is beginning to clear. The big picture is coming into focus. And the most common reaction is, well, hey, things are looking pretty good where I am. Why should I change? So it's not only more demand, but you've got this constraint in supply. And that's all the more reason why we should consider the importance of the story about the opportunity you have to offer. But an even bigger reason is that the talent you want are not paying much attention to postings about jobs. Why? Well, they already have a job. Now, sure, they may skim job postings every now and then, maybe when they've had a particularly bad day, but mostly they don't pay attention. Now, here are some examples of what candidates would have seen if they were looking at some recent online postings. I'll let you take a look at this one. Provide full analytical support for ongoing, assist with preparation of analysis schedules. You kind of look at that, and it's a bit of a snoozer, don't you think? You know? I mean, it doesn't exactly set you on fire and get you really interested in this kind of an opportunity. The high-performing talent is just not going to be attracted to this. This next listing is a little bit better. It still dwells on the to-do part of the job, but it's a little bit better. It tells you kind of what's going to be involved in the job. It's a little dry, but it's better. Now, this third one is a little bit better still because particularly you can see that the first 2 points connect with candidate aspirations. Supervise, coach, and educate staff. Partner with the principal on client projects. Those are the kind of statements that can get someone's attention. Now, that's what you should reach for, because even though that talent may not pay attention to a posting about a job, they will pay attention to a story about how their future and maybe their family's future would be better if they came to work for you. Now, what is your story, and how do you begin to develop it? Okay? The first thing is, when you talk about your firm or your practice, you need to be specific. So everyone talks about fast growing, and they're right. Firms are fast growing these days. Okay? But you need to use a real statistic to make your firm and your practice stand out. Maybe it's double-digit year-over-year growth in each of the last 4 years. Or maybe the statistic has to do with growth in practice revenues. Whatever you say, okay, you must be specific to show that you're not hiding behind euphemisms, okay? take a look at what makes a position attractive. What is the story? How do you talk about the opportunity? Well, here are some aspects that you can highlight. First of all, there's learning. Maybe they can learn about new industries, new service lines. There's growth opportunity. One of the ways to talk about growth could be in terms of the number of partners who once started at this job title. Client contact is another element to emphasize because professionals, particularly younger professionals who come into business valuation, really like the idea that they get a close look at a variety of businesses, and client contact is all about that, is all about that. And finally, autonomy. If there's anything that's important to today's young professionals, it's autonomy. And if you're going to offer that, you need to talk about it. You may have a unique situation that you're looking for your successor, in which case you might actually benefit from talking about how this an opportunity is an heir apparent. Now, some of you may wonder, oh, gee, do I really want to talk about that? Do I really want to tell people that that's what the opportunity is about? Well, I say if that's what the opportunity is about, that you should say it. And the reason is because your goal is to get as many fish as close to the boat as you can so that you can get the net under them. You're not going to hire somebody automatically for that. You're going to apply certain vetting, but that's the bait you need to use. Another way to say that, frankly, maybe you're more comfortable with it, is next generation leadership, okay? Now, I talk to a number of people, and they say, well, yeah, but where do I get this story? How do I figure out what that story could be? Because I'm different from the next guy. Of course you are. So where you can start is ask your own employees. Ask them what they think about why your practice or this position would be attractive to somebody. You might be surprised by their answers, but those answers are more likely to reflect the interests of the talent that you hope to hire. What do you want to ask them? What would you tell someone are the most interesting and fun parts of this job? If you're looking for ideas for how you describe the fun and interesting parts of the job, ask the person who's in it. Ask the person who's worked there, okay? This question is particularly useful if you can speak to someone who once did this job. What was the most interesting thing you learned when you did this job? What do you tell people when you want to brag about what it's like to work here? In effect, what you need to do in telling this story is brag about what it's like to work here. Well, you have your own answer to that kind of question, but the key person who has the best answer is your employee. They're the people who tell the stories that you want to be telling to attract good talent. And finally, what is the commonality among people who work here? One of the most interesting answers I've ever heard to that question is, well, everybody plays well in the sandbox. You never know what kind of an answer you're going to get to that, but the answer that you get, I promise you, will be very useful as you develop the story that you want to tell about your practice. Now, some of you may be in a smaller practice, and you may think, gee, I'm at a kind of a disadvantage here because, how do I compete with these bigger folks in terms of what I can tell people about, what it's like to work here and how do I attract people? It could be tough to compete with that talent, but there are certain advantages that you have, and so here are some ideas for how to weave those advantages into your story. First of all, when you work here, access to decision makers, and if they reject your ideas, you'll know why. You'll have rapid approval or rejection of your ideas, and in many cases, you'll be able to make your own decisions. You'll have broad responsibilities. Look, because we have a lean staff, you're going to have broad responsibilities. You'll have cross-functional responsibilities. There will be no restrictive job descriptions. We have a highly collaborative work environment that is designed around the needs of innovators. All right? Every one of these is an element of work that is highly appealing to today's young professional. They want these kinds of things, and if you can offer it, that's the story that you should tell. Even though you have a smaller practice, maybe in a smaller market, there are advantages you have that will appeal to them. Figure out what they are and promote them. Jared, we're up with the first poll question at this time. We're going to ask you here, which option best describes the situation with your most recent hire? We're going to ask you to check one. The first one, we had many good candidates and a pretty easy hiring decision. Secondly, we wanted better candidates, but, we're okay with our choice. The third one, we had to compromise more than we wanted in order to hire. Which of those apply to you in your most recent hire? Many good candidates, easy hiring. Yeah, you wanted better ones, but you're okay with the choice. Or you just had to compromise more than you wanted in order to hire. We'll give you a few more seconds to register your choice. And I can tell you that most people are in that middle category. You wanted better candidates, but you're okay with your choice. That's good. That's not bad. All right. Thank you. Let's go back to the slides. Now, every job posting attracts unqualified applicants. You know that. Telling a better story will get you better candidates, but paradoxically, it will also increase the number of unqualifieds. Still, you've got to treat them professionally with a no thanks. I think a good phrase to use is, I'm sorry because of whatever, you are ineligible for consideration. I think that's a very handy phrase, ineligible for consideration, okay? There you go. Now, while you're taking a look at all of these candidates, though, remember that they are taking a look at you. And therefore, you have to bring your A game to this process. And the reason is they think the way you hire is the way you manage. Really. In the absence of any kind of information to the contrary, the candidate assumes that what he or she sees during the hiring process is the way it is at your office pretty much all the time. And what can look to you like, minor slip-ups are magnified beyond reality, and they can undermine that strong positive impression that you need to make. I mean, how many times Have you told your candidate you'd get back to her by Thursday, but you didn't actually follow up until the next Monday or maybe Tuesday? How often does a candidate arrive for an interview and the person he was supposed to meet with isn't there and a suitable replacement can't be quickly arranged? I mean, do you tell your candidate to expect an offer by the end of the week and it's not actually finished until the end of the next week? These can be momentarily embarrassing to you, but you take them in the context of everything else you have on your plate at the time. Your candidate doesn't, though. She is focused on one thing only: how you respond to her and whether you can be counted on to do what you say you'll do when you say you'll do it. Look, when you have to fight hard to attract and hire high-quality candidates, you can't afford to lose an advantage because of easily avoidable mistakes. So what can you do? Well, one thing that helps is to make hiring its own to-do list. Now, if you have an HR person or function to help you, use it. But here's an example of the problem, okay? Hire new staff person gets put on your to-do list along with everything else. And then, like everything else, it moves up and down on that list depending on the press of other priorities, the report that you need to complete to meet a court deadline, the call you need to return from a top referral source, the client who wants your help in putting a sales price on his business. And because hire new staff person is really only directly connected to revenue, and frankly, let's admit it, it's probably among your least favorite things to do anyway. It's easy to let it slip lower and lower on the list until it almost disappears altogether. So, try setting up hire new staff person as a separate to-do list. Itemize the steps you know you have to complete. Be attentive to the list and do one thing from the list every day. Before you know it, you'll have your new staff person hired. And when you do, you'll have the support you need to help you tackle those items on your regular to-do list. Now, when it comes to hiring, it's also helpful to set up a process that reinforces fairness and objectivity. One way to do that is to work out schedules so that you use the same set of interviewers for every candidate. Now, if you're already using an interview score sheet, pat yourself on the back. If you aren't, you should. You can find thousands of examples all over the internet. An interview score sheet helps you gather information about a single candidate from multiple interviewers and lets you do an apples-to-apples analysis between candidates. Now, here are some suggestions for things to evaluate, items to put on your score sheet. It's not an all-inclusive list. You can shorten it. You can lengthen it with, depending on your situation. Does the candidate have the necessary educational qualifications or training? And you ask your people to give them a score, 1 through 5. Has the candidate acquired similar skills or qualifications through past work experience? Did the candidate demonstrate effective communication skills during the interview? And did the candidate show enthusiasm for the position and the company? Everybody wants to hire people who want them. This is an important marker. Did the candidate demonstrate an ability to get along with others and work as part of a team? Did the candidate demonstrate an ethical approach to the profession? And did the candidate show a commitment of service to the client. These are all important characteristics. You may have others. You can arrange them any way you want, but the key is to use this, okay? Now, there are two final questions. How likely is this candidate to succeed at ABC? Your employees who are part of the interview process know what it takes to succeed there, and their answers to this question will be useful. The bottom line question, should we hire this candidate? Yes, no, unsure. You got to give them an unsure option. Now, when you involve a candidate's peers in the interviewing process, it can feel risky to ask them this question, but it's actually a good move. For one thing, it demonstrates that you take their views seriously. Secondly, and perhaps surprisingly, the answers can reveal issues that are worth considering. When you have all the score sheets, compile, average the numerical scores. If you're inclined, you can develop sophisticated graphs to help you look at and think about the results. It's not likely that you will find outliers among individual interviewers. If you do, of course, it's worth poking into. It's worth investigating to see if there is something else that you should consider. Now we're going to move to the subject of measuring and testing, but before we do, we have a second poll question. We'd like to know, which of the following do you do consistently when you hire? And you can check all that apply. You, it's gone from my screen. Jared, can you help me get that back?
I can. You should be able to see it under, if you're looking at the white column on your right-hand side, under polls and open, you should be able to see the
my
responses
mistake.
there.
Here we go. Do you assess for writing or analytical skills? Do you assess for technical skills? And do you assess for the fit with your practice and your team? Writing, analytical, technical, and fit. All right. Thank you. Let's close that poll and go back to the slides. And let's take a closer look at those elements. All right. In measuring and testing, one of the things that's useful to do is to take a look at analytical skills. Okay. Secondly, take a look at writing skills. Thirdly, as was indicated in the poll question, to check for overall fit. Now, let's cover each of these one at a time. When it comes to analytical skills, probably the very best way to test for analytical skills that I have seen is to employ a case study. Now, it's the most useful approach, but it's also the most time-consuming when it comes to developing it, okay? But if you have it and you can put one together, you will find that it will give you the best data for your decision. Very detailed insight into the analytical capabilities of your candidate. The downside of a case study is it can be more challenging when you're talking about an entry-level candidate, because that's a candidate who probably hasn't applied the analytical skills that you are attempting to test for, okay? Now, the second one, of course, here, in addition, is Excel testing. It's easier to create. And if you don't have one of those, you really should. You can put one together to suit your own needs at the level of difficulty that you want to apply for a given position. You can even get them off the shelf. All right? They're available to you. I have talked to employers who wish in hindsight that they had, because during the interview process, the candidate gave the impression that he or she really knew Excel very well, and once they got on the job, they didn't, okay? Excel testing is a terrific way to assess efficiency and productivity. When you do an Excel testing, this is testing that should be timed, okay? So you can see what kind of efficiency and productivity your candidate follows within a given time, okay? Now, after analytical skills, let's talk for a few moments about writing skills. I think the most common way that employers try to assess writing skills is by asking for a writing sample, usually a BV report, all right? That's very, very common. But I've also found that there are a couple of issues associated with this particular report. One of them is the question, who wrote it? Is this a report that was actually written by the candidate you're interviewing? Or is it a report that that candidate wrote and then went through a major editing and review process by someone else? So if you're going to do something like this, you need to make sure that you are getting the work of the person you're interviewing, all right? If it's not a BV report, maybe there are other writing samples, okay? If the person hasn't done a full report, they're just not at that level in the experience hierarchy, maybe they could at least supply an industry section or an economic section to see what it. But the second and big issue associated with BV reports and using them is the question of who owns it. You know, if this is something of an ethical question that I've run into from time to time, I don't have a good answer. But if you're asking somebody to show you a BV report that they've prepared, it's a report that some client has paid for. And if the client paid for it, it probably belongs to that client. And so it's worth giving some serious thought to, you know, how big a part you want to play in asking somebody to cross that particular line. When it comes to overall fit, I noticed that the majority of the respondents to the poll question, 41% of them, actually do assess for fit with the practice and the team. And there may be a variety of ways that you do that. I am going to walk you through 3 of them that I have found to be pretty common in business valuation litigation support hiring. The first one of them is something called predictive index. You can find them there on the web at piworldwide.com. Now, the predictive index has the advantage that it is short, easy to give. It takes maybe 10, 15 minutes for your candidate to complete this. Very quick, doesn't take any time at all. It has a very simplified report. It's easy in that respect. The only downside of predictive index, though, is that it requires a benchmark. In other words, you have to work with a predictive index consultant to make sure that you have set up a benchmark against which you're comparing your candidate so that you know whether the score that you're getting is the score that you're expecting, the score that you want to see, or the degree to which it's not. So it's important to have that benchmark, but the benchmark doesn't come built in. You have to create that yourself. A second option that some BV practices have used is what's called the Berkman method. And that's available, again, on the web at berkman.com. Now, the Berkman is more in-depth than the predictive index. So you get a little bit more out of it in that respect. It is a multifaceted approach, and what I mean by that is that it takes more personal characteristics, individual characteristics into account than the predictive index does. And it actually has a broader consultative value. In other words, you can use it not only during the hiring process, but you can also use it after the person is on board in terms of helping coach them on to better performance. Now, the third one of these is something that I have created. It's the Borrowman-Baker BV Candidate Assessment. You can find it at my website, borrowmanbaker.com. One of the things to say about this is that it is customized to BV. In fact, it is the only candidate assessment I've ever found that is customized to BV. The report that it creates for you includes suggested interview questions for you to use to make sure that you are investigating the fit or not of a candidate a little more deeply. And probably the key advantage to this is that it is ideal for entry-level hires. And by entry-level, I mean not only people fresh out of school, but people who are maybe coming over from audit or tax with no experience in BV. You see, that's a category of candidates who have no writing samples to speak of. They have no experience in the field to speak of. It's difficult to measure, and that's why this way of looking at overall fit is just that much more important, and why this particular candidate assessment can be that much more helpful. Okay? Now, also, in measuring and testing, there is a way that you can test writing and research skills. This is something that I heard about from an employer many years ago. I thought this is a pretty good idea. And here's how it works. You assign an industry report to your candidate. You ask for a couple of pages, 2 or 3 pages. You assign the focus such that the candidate is seeking out and writing on the basis of public data, easy to obtain, but yet geographically narrowed to a specific location. So let me give you some examples so you can see what I mean here, okay? Ask them to do a report on beer distributors in Milwaukee, oil field services in Tulsa, coffee bars in Seattle, or restaurants in any city. Again, the idea is to ask them to look for the data that's easily obtainable, but in a specific location so they're not just running all over the place, and just see what they come up with and how they write it and what they can produce for you, okay? Let's move on now. Assuming you've gotten somebody that you want to hire and you want to make an offer, and now we're talking about the money question, okay? The money question. Now, if you are in California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Illinois, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Maine, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Vermont, or Washington, avoid asking about salary or salary history prior to making an offer. This is a fairly recent development. These 17 states, and who knows, there may be more by now, that have passed legislation. Sometimes the legislation is referred to as pay equity laws, but in any case, it includes prohibitions on asking about salary. So don't ask it. All right, you say, we can't ask that. What can you ask? Well, you can come at this sideways, okay? Ask about a compensation target. Tell me what your compensation target is. Ask about an expectation. Tell me about compensation expectations that you have. What are your thoughts about compensation? And if you really want to go broad, ask about philosophy. Do you have a particular philosophy about compensation? A philosophy maybe that relates to how much is in salary and how much is in bonus? Okay? Now, you might be surprised, frankly, at the number of times your candidate will actually volunteer information about current salary. I find that when I interview, I ask about what's your compensation target. The next thing I know, they're telling me what their base salary is. When the candidate volunteers that information, you're off the hook, okay? So you can ask these questions. No matter, they're probably going to tell you some kind of number, whether it's actual what they make or it's the target, expectation, thought, whatever it is. And your follow-up question, how did you arrive at that number? How did you arrive at that number? That's where you really get to dig more deeply into their thinking, okay? Maybe they'll give you some information that provides some genuine insight. Maybe you'll learn that they're just pulling it out of the air, okay? You never know, but it's important to ask that question, all right? Now, we're going to move to extending an offer, but before we do that, we have one more poll question. So if we can bring that one up. Which of the following did you use the last time you hired? And check all that apply. LinkedIn, Facebook, job boards, Indeed, maybe Simply Hired are a couple of examples, or an external recruiter. Which of the following did you use? Just check all that apply. LinkedIn, Facebook, job boards, external recruiter. Okay, and about 40% of the folks today use job boards. LinkedIn and external recruiter are about tied, and very few use Facebook. That's no surprise. I don't think very many people go to Facebook looking for job ads or expecting to see them, but you never know. You never know what you can find. Okay. Boy, the numbers are moving around here. LinkedIn is apparently becoming more popular. But you want to check in. Check all that apply there. Okay? We'll give you a few more seconds, and then we'll move back to the subject of extending an offer. All right. Thank you, Jared. When it comes to extending an offer, at some point you're going to be ready to do that. And this is the moment your candidate has been waiting for. Up to now, you've held all the cards. But before you play your hand, it's helpful to know what cards your candidate is holding. And so here are some tactics that you can use about that. First of all, you want to prime your candidate, okay? Your default here should be to deliver the offer in person. That's always best, in person. And use that time to set the anchor for a short decision time frame. So when you set up the appointment, you tell your candidate, we're going to discuss an offer. This primes the candidate to focus and listen carefully. They know what's coming, they just don't know exactly what's coming. And then, When you're face-to-face with the candidate and you're ready to make an offer, prime your candidate to reply promptly. Remember, this is the moment they've been waiting for. Once they have that offer, they just want to hold it. They want to pet it. They want to sleep with it under their pillow. They've worked hard to get it, and it feels good just to have it around, okay? But try this script. Before I talk about our offer, I wanted to check something with you. Today is the 1st of June. We'll expect your answer by the 8th. Is there any reason you wouldn't be able to do that? Now, your candidate will probably be caught off guard and will hesitate. Candidates expect a deadline in an offer letter. They're just not accustomed to having the issue put on the table so boldly. And any reply other than an unqualified yes calls for follow-up dialogue. Your first question, why? Why would you not be able to do that? Listen, ask more questions, maybe ask what deadline would work. The answer to that might signal that you're likely to get a yes and that you should go ahead and extend the offer. Maybe you'll hear a bona fide reason for extending your deadline. Or the answer might reveal that you have competition to take into account. Your objective, again, is to know what cards your candidate holds before you play your hand. And don't forget that you do have the option to postpone the offer so it isn't used as leverage against you. If you do extend the offer, though, stick to your deadline and be prepared to go to your number 2 choice. Now, you also want to, when it comes to facing counteroffers, I think there are 2 categories of employers. Unfortunately, there are those that have faced them and those that will face them. If you haven't lost a candidate to a counteroffer, you probably know someone who has, and your best protection is putting the subject on the table front and center during the candidate interview. Every interview has to include direct questions about motivation. Candidates don't come to an interview for no reason. Ask them why they're even thinking of making a change and what they're looking for in the next step in their career. When candidates aren't clear on these points, they can be more easily swayed by a counteroffer. And if you hear problems that are focused on money, be very cautious, because money is the easiest problem to be fixed with a counteroffer. Then you put the counteroffer issue on the table with these questions. Accepting an offer from us will mean leaving where you are. How will your firm react? You've got to deliver the question in a tone of genuine interest and curiosity. The less judgment you introduce via your tone, the more candid the answer is likely to be. And don't be surprised if the answer is, well, I don't know. Your candidate may have seen coworkers leave without knowing the full story around the departure. If your candidate seems non-responsive to that question, try this. Have you seen your employer make counteroffers to others? What was the result? This nudges your candidate to think more seriously about the possibility of a counteroffer. It's true that some candidates haven't given any thought at all to the issue, and they're the ones who are most easily caught off guard when the counteroffer is presented. That, in turn, makes them more difficult to reel back in. There are some who maybe have thought about it a little bit, but who are practicing avoidance in hopes they won't actually have to face one. And finally, there are a few who haven't actually made a clear decision to leave and who could end up using your offer as leverage. So here's the final question. Do you anticipate a counteroffer? And more importantly, of course, if the answer is yes, the question is, well, what will you do about it? Look, these are very bold questions. You need to use them later in the interview process, after you've developed rapport with a candidate, you need to ask them in a friendly, curious tone, but this is information you need to measure your risk. The responses might make you confident you could overcome an actual counteroffer, or you might decide the risk is high enough that you elect not to make an offer at all. Either way, you've made a smarter hiring decision. Now, lastly, let's go to the subject of onboarding. Now, I'm going to assume that you've come across this term at some point. It's a buzzword that's been around about 5 or maybe 6 years, and it refers to the process of making sure your new employee hits the ground running, as we all say. Employee retention is on everyone's mind. You need to remember that retention starts the day you hire. Why is that? Because life is about to change for your new employee. The change starts with driving a new route to a new office. There'll be new faces, new procedures, maybe even a new city. Things that can look like tiny glitches to you can feel like big problems to your new hire. Doubts can pile up and slow the rapid climb to productivity that you're expecting. And as importantly as this is, life is about to change for your staff. Remember, they're wondering, who is this new person? Will they be successful? What does this mean for me and my job? And I can promise you, if you don't answer those questions for them, they will make up their own answers, and those answers may not be good for you. All right? Now, onboarding kicks into a higher gear when the offer letter is signed. Okay? So here are some steps you might think about including in your process. Think about a welcome package. A package that opens with a warm, personal letter from the person at the top. You could include copies of employee policies and benefits, forms that need to be returned for payroll or benefits enrollment. The thing here is that momentum helps inoculate your candidate against second thoughts, or what you might call buyer's remorse. All right? Office announcements with the new hire's email address and or phone number in order to encourage welcome calls, something else you can do. Industry announcements maybe in papers and trade publications. But here's a tip. Make sure the candidate understands that a signed offer letter is going to trigger those announcements, okay? If your candidate wants you to delay a day or two in the process so they can give a resignation notice, that's fine. But you don't want to be delaying this, this announcements thing very long at all. And finally, make sure your new hire's workspace looks like it's ready for the first day. Stock it up with some fresh supply of pens and pencils and notepads. Nothing says commitment like newly minted business cards. And as a bonus, add a gift card to a local restaurant or a bookstore. It won't cost you much, but it's such a nice touch, okay? Now, onboarding shifts to an even higher gear on the start date. So plan a brief welcome or orientation from the same person who signed the welcome letter. Now, do this in person whenever possible. On-screen video is an option. If your only choice is a phone call, it's still better than nothing, so you do it. You assign an employee also to be a guide to answer those inevitable questions about things that everybody else who works there just probably takes for granted. You know, what time is this, and how do you find the copier, and where is the bathroom, and those kinds of things. This guide role is actually short-term, okay, and should not be confused with whomever you select to be this person's mentor. Schedule a special lunch on the start date. Invite the new hire's direct supervisor and as many up the chain of command as can be available. Include as many peers as reasonable. Use the lunch to share the culture of the practice and goals and strategies for your practice. At the same time, you orient your new hire to the culture of the firm. You use that to reorient the team on goals and strategies, so you make sure everybody still knows they're on the same page. Lastly, make use of focused check-ins, all right? Brief but focused check-ins, maybe at the 30-day, 60-day mark, are really good. As part of that conversation, urge the new hire to self-evaluate. Acknowledge, encourage the things that are going right, add corrections if necessary. New employees always perform better from immediate feedback on how they're doing and the changes they need to make. Now, you can manage this entire onboarding process with a simple checklist of activities. It doesn't have to be anything more difficult than that. Or you can use any one of many off-the-shelf software options that are out there for this. The key is to do something. Onboarding is an investment. It produces dividends in higher job satisfaction, faster time to high productivity, and improved retention rates. You know, BV hiring is tough, but it doesn't mean you can't do it smarter. I really appreciate your spending the time with me today. We have some time at the end here. If there are those of you who have questions, here is an excellent question. Aren't there a lot more BV programs at universities? Any tips for recruiting from schools? Absolutely. One of the biggest developments over the last probably 4 to 5 years that I have seen is the degree to which valuation, financial analysis, and modeling work is being incorporated into university finance curricula. All right? If you are not already in touch with the colleges and universities in your market, in your area, you should be. Go to the website of the institution, look in their accounting and finance programs, find the names of the professors, reach out to them. Probably the easiest and quickest thing you could do is invite yourself. You can do that delicately, but invite yourself to come speak to a class. I don't think that there is a professor alive who wouldn't love to have someone who does what you do come in and talk to students. Okay? Professors want their students to learn, but today's professors also want their students to be connected with the real world of jobs that await them after the line of study that they're involved in. So if you start with just offering to come in and do a talk in class someday, you never know where that can lead. You may be the only BV professional coming in and talking to these folks, and that in turn means that you'll be first in line when it comes to being able to interview their top students. Okay? These are happening more and more across the country. Again, the thing to do, make an entree into your local college and universities. Talk to those people first. Looking for any other questions that you might have at this point? We're coming up on the. Go ahead, Andy.
John, I had a question actually. this morning on the way to the office, I heard about a new survey that came out. I didn't get who put the survey out, but the gist of it was that people change jobs and take another job, not for primarily more money, but for chances for advancement. And I was wondering if you saw that kind of phenomenon in this profession, because I think most people think people will change jobs just to get more money, but it's not really so.
That is correct. They do leave for more advancement, and one of the motivations that I hear commonly from people is, I'm just not growing. I'm just not learning. Okay? And from the standpoint of somebody at the top of the food chain looking down, as it were, it may look to you like there are lots and lots of growth and learning opportunities. Gosh, if they'd only take advantage of it. But the thing is, they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what there is to know. And so it's not about hand-holding, but it is about laying out some steps to growth. And, man, there are lots and lots of books out there on the bookshelf these days about working with those lovely millennials. Everybody's got an opinion about them, but I can assure you they're here to stay. And yes, they do make a move for growth, and it's not always money. They'll make a move for a lateral on salary, because they have more growth opportunities that are available to them, and which ties back to what I was saying earlier about pitching growth opportunities as part of the story of the opportunity at your practice.
Yeah, good. Another question: what about recruiting from other firms or approaching candidates who are with other firms? Does that get a little sensitive, or is that a whole other topic or issue?
Yes and yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it can be sensitive. I'm stumbling for an answer here, but let me come up with this recommendation. Okay, if the best, I think the most productive and the most effective and frankly the most diplomatic way to deal with this is to make sure that you, as a practice leader, are attending those industry-related networking events where younger professionals show up. And so that your approach is always one, or should be, always one of just getting to know them. When you're talking to them in that casual social networking context, and you're able to inquire into what kind of work you're doing, and, well, gee, what attracted you to this profession? And questions like that, just inquisitive kind of stuff, that can, once you have established a relationship in that way, it makes it much easier for you to move on to the next step of perhaps a specific, hey, why don't we come sit down and talk about, would you like to have lunch? I'd like to talk to you about our practice. It's the more direct approach that is difficult when that's the only approach you use. If you warm up the relationship through networking, then it makes it easier to make the more direct approach.
Yeah. It can get a little sensitive. I remember a couple of years ago there was a case, I won't mention the firms, but it was a large firm. There was lawsuits going on over, I don't remember if it was poaching or if it was about trade secret or some kind of, it can get a little, you have to take caution, right, when you're doing this.
Well, you do. And Trade secrets is a very sensitive area, okay? And you can cover yourself as a hiring employer by simply making sure at the time of hiring that not only are you not asking this employee to bring any trade secrets with them, you might even insist that they actually sign a release of some kind saying that they are not bringing trade secrets. Okay? And I guess on the other side of the ledger, of course, it probably wouldn't hurt to have your own protection for anything you consider to be trade secrets. Okay? In other words, you have a bright line about that enables you to have standing for pursuing someone who crosses that line.
Right.
It's where the lines are not in place that people have the most trouble.
Okay, well, I don't see any more questions, John. Do you have any final remarks before we wrap this up?
Just that thank you all for being a part of this, and if you have questions in the next day or two, sometimes I know questions come later, hit me with an email, give me a call. I'm happy to spend time on the phone with you and at least try to answer your questions. I want to be of whatever service I can be.
Well, great, terrific. Thanks so much, John, for a very interesting presentation, and thanks to everyone in the audience for attending.